On November 29, 1981, Natalie Wood drowned near Catalina Island off the coast of Southern California while vacationing during the filming of her next movie, Brainstorm. It was never officially determined how she ended up in the water, but many have speculated how a person who was afraid of water ended up on a dinghy in the middle of the night. Before we talk more about the circumstances of her death, let's back up some and talk about who Natalie Wood was and the other people on the boat. Natalie Wood was an American actress born to Russian immigrant parents on July 20th, 1938. Natalie was best known for her roles in Miracle on 34th Street, Rebel Without a Cause, and West Side Story. Growing up, Natalie was terrified of water. This seemed to stem from an accident that she had on set of The Green Promise at the age of 10. On the studio set, Wood was filming a storm scene where she had to run across a bridge. This stunt went wrong when the bridge collapsed and Wood ended up in the water. She hit her left wrist but managed to pull herself out. This incident, along with her mother being very superstitious about water, led Natalie to reportedly not even be able to use her own swimming pool and having nightmares about water. Her mother actually went to a gypsy, and the gypsy told her mom that Natalie would drown.
I think that's so fascinating, and I'm kind of into superstitious things like that, and I know if I was her, I would kind of have that fear in the back of my mind the rest of my life, too.
Right, and I'm not the biggest superstitious person, but if I was told repeatedly from a young age that I was going to drown, I would also have a big fear of water.
And she had a lot of weird run-ins and accidents with water, too. And I mean, you could say maybe the fear kind of led to those, who knows. Natalie Wood married Robert Wagner twice in her life. The pair began dating when Natalie was 18 and Robert was 26, and it's been said that they were set up by their respective movie studios for publicity. Their first marriage lasted from December 28, 1957 until June 20th, 1961, when they announced their separation, and they were divorced 10 months later on April 27th, 1962. In between her first and second marriages to Wagner, she married Richard Gregson and had a child named Natasha, which was actually Natalie's nickname as a child. Wood separated from Gregson and rekindled her romance with Wagner in the beginning of January 1972. They remarried on July 26th of the same year on a boat and had a daughter named Courtney, and they remained together until Natalie's death. The boat trip in question began on November 27th with Natalie Wood along with her husband Robert Wagner and Brainstorm co-star Christopher Walken. They boarded Wagner's yacht named the Splendor, and the Splendor's captain for the trip was Dennis Davern, a self-described close family friend of Robert and Natalie. On that night, Wood and Wagner began arguing, and Captain Davern took Natalie ashore on the boat's dinghy. And for those that don't know, the dinghy is like a small rescue boat, I guess you would say, that's attached to larger boats. And when they did go ashore, they stayed in a hotel together. And it's unclear if they stayed in one or two rooms. I've heard different things. And at first, Davern actually lied to the police about this entire incident. But during their initial investigation, police found evidence proving him wrong and that they did not spend the night of the 27th on the boat. On the evening of November 28th, 1981, at 10:30 p.m., the group boarded after having dinner at Doug's Harbor Reef on Catalina Island. The group is said to have enjoyed champagne, wine, and cocktails, and the evening manager, Don Whiting, said he was worried that the group was too drunk to make it back to the boat safely. And their waitress also said Natalie seemed to be in a bad mood that evening. It should be noted that night it was raining and the water was choppy. Around 11 p.m. on the 28th, the people on board noticed that Natalie was missing. At 1:30 a.m., the captain called to shore, and 2 hours later at 3:30 a.m., the Coast Guard was called. Many people questioned why it took 4 hours to call the Coast Guard. And at 7:30 a.m., Wood's body was found floating face down near an isolated cove named Blue Cavern Point. She was wearing socks, a nightgown, and a coat. It was reported that a woman heard another woman screaming for help during the time frame Natalie was missing. And Robert Wagner told police he and Natalie had fought about her spending time away from her family and that she had left Wagner and Walken alone to get ready for bed. The deputy medical examiner, Dr. Joseph Choi, performed the autopsy and found that when examining bruises on her arm, legs, and head. In addition to her elevated blood alcohol level of 0.14, her death was ruled an accident. Dr. Choi stated that her death was an accidental drowning as a result of her attempting to board the dinghy, named the Prince Valiant. The initial investigation into her death lasted just 2 weeks. In 2011, the LA County Sheriff's Department, our old friends, reopened the death investigation after Davern stated he lied to police. We'll get into those details a little later. And a year after that, in 2012, the LA Coroner's Office amended Wood's death certificate to change the manner of death from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. This came after they determined some of her bruises may have been sustained before she drowned, but the coroners cannot definitively determine when the bruises were inflicted. In 2018, Wagner was named a person of interest in Natalie's death. A new HBO documentary, which I know you watched, Dell, I didn't get the chance to watch it, was recently released about Natalie Wood. During his interview, Robert Wagner gave the following account of the events surrounding the night that Natalie Wood died. The group had dinner on the shore and then went back to the boat. They opened a few bottles of wine. While drinking, Wagner and Walken started arguing about Wood's future in acting. During this time, Wood went downstairs to the stateroom to get ready for bed, and Wagner and Walken kept up this heated conversation. Wagner claimed the conversation calmed down, and he then went to look for Wood. He realized she was gone and the dinghy was missing. When they couldn't find her or the dinghy on the shore, they called for help. And hours later, the Coast Guard found her body in the water.
There are several theories associated with this case. This includes theories from two of the people that were on the boat. These theories are purely speculative, and we may never know what really happened. We are not here to convince you of someone's guilt or innocence. All persons are presumed innocent until proven guilty in the court of law. The police thought Natalie was trying to leave the boat and get to shore because of the argument between Wagner and Walken and accidentally drowned. This theory was alleged by coroner Thomas Noguchi and reported in the LA Times, but Noguchi slightly backpedaled on this theory in his 1983 book. Captain Darren wrote a book entitled Goodbye Natalie, Goodbye Splendor, in which he states his account of what happened on the night of Natalie's death, which differed from what he originally told the police in 1981. Darren alleges that Wagner and Wood got into a drunken fight after Wagner said to Walken, "What are you trying to do? F my wife?" Darren claims Natalie and Walken had been flirting on the trip. The shouting and noise from the fight were also heard by other witnesses on a nearby boat, and both they and Darren claimed the noise suddenly stopped. Darren believes that Wagner pushed Wood off the yacht to her death. He also claims Wagner essentially held him hostage following Wood's death so he would not begin a search for Natalie and cooperate with police, and that Wagner was sweaty and tussled like he had been in a fight. Darren cannot be considered the most credible witness because he waited years to come forward, lied to the police, and disclosed many details to the media. Christopher Walken gave his theory of what happened during an interview with Playboy magazine. He stated, quote, "What happened that night only she knows because she was alone. She had gone to bed before us and her room was at the back. A dinghy was bouncing against the side of the boat, and I think she went out to move it. There was a ski ramp that was partially in the water. It was slippery. I had to walk on it myself. She told me she couldn't swim. In fact, they had to cut a swimming scene from Brainstorm. She was probably half asleep, and she was wearing a coat." He then goes on to say that he thinks that Wood hit her head and fell into the water. When they couldn't find her, Walken says that he and Wagner assumed that Wood went to call the children as she had done on previous nights. Like we said, Robert Wagner believes Natalie accidentally drowned after attempting to tie the dinghy closer to the boat and fell into the water. Natalie allegedly complained that the dinghy hitting the boat was making too much noise. He also claimed that she probably slipped on the algae that was on the boat's swimming step. He talked about this in both of his autobiographies. Some other theories include that this was an accidental drowning caused by a suicide attempt. Author Suzanne Feinstein claims that Natalie had attempted suicide before, but this information has only been verified by Natalie's sister, Lana Wood, and they had a strained relationship. It should be noted that in a 2018 interview, Lana called Wagner to speak up about the truth. She previously had stated she didn't think Wagner would have intentionally hurt Natalie, but she understood that things can get out of hand when there's drinking and fighting. The most popular theory is that Wagner killed Natalie because he was jealous of her career success and alleged affairs she had throughout their marriages. This includes alleged affairs with Warren Beatty and Christopher Walken. His children believe in his innocence. Orenthal James Simpson, or OJ as he is better known, started life in the public eye when the running back was selected as the first-round draft pick in the 1969 NFL Draft. This was no surprise as he was a star football player in college, winning the Heisman Trophy, Maxwell Award, and being crowned a two-time All-American. This continued into his professional career. Nicknamed the Juice, Simpson is the 1973 NFL MVP and was selected for both the NFL 75th anniversary team and the NFL 100th anniversary team. He still holds several NFL records, including most rushing yards in a season. And for my people that aren't sports fans, just know that this is an amazing career, and he's definitely someone who will go down as one of the best professional football players in history, even though he's very problematic, to say the least. OJ met Nicole Brown when she was waitressing in Beverly Hills. OJ was still married to his first wife, but the pair started dating anyway. Simpson later got a divorce, and he and Nicole got married on February 2nd, 1985. They had 2 children during this time, but things were said to be very chaotic. It has been alleged that OJ was abusive towards Nicole throughout their relationship. One of the ways OJ is alleged to have abused Nicole was financially. Due to their prenuptial agreement, she was not allowed to have a job. This caused her to be financially dependent on OJ, which made it harder for her to leave. Nicole called the police several times. As a result of one of those calls, OJ was arrested for domestic violence. He pleaded no contest to spousal abuse in 1989. Nicole filed for divorce on February 2nd, 1992. After their divorce was final, the two got back together. This time was not any better for Nicole. On October 25th, 1993, Nicole called 911 and said that, quote, "he's gonna beat the S out of me," end quote. The pair called it quits for good several months after this incident. On June 12, 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson went to her daughter's recital at Paul Revere Middle School. OJ also attended this event. The family then went out to eat at Mezzaluna, but OJ was not invited to join the family. Ron Goldman was a waiter at Mezzaluna, but he was not assigned to Brown's table that night. After leaving Mezzaluna, Brown took her kids to Ben & Jerry's. At 9:37 p.m., Nicole's mother called Mezzaluna and spoke with the manager, Karen Lee Crawford, to let her know that she had lost her glasses. Crawford put them in a white envelope, and Ron agreed to drop them off at Nicole's house, since the pair was already friends. Goldman left the restaurant at 9:50 p.m. once his shift had ended. During this same period of time, OJ was eating McDonald's with Kato Caitlin at his estate. On June 13, 1994, the bodies of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman were found dead. It was determined that they had died between 10:15 and 11 p.m. Their bodies were discovered by Stephen Schwab, who noticed that Nicole's dog had blood on his paw but wasn't injured. When someone took the dog back towards the house, they found the bodies and flagged down a patrol car.
Brown's body was found at the bottom of her front steps. She had multiple stab wounds on her head and neck. She also had defensive wounds. The final cut was determined to be a deep cut across her neck. The assailant then went to Goldman near the fence and put him in a chokehold. He was then stabbed repeatedly in the body and neck. A blue cap, leather glove, and the glasses were found near Goldman's body. After killing Goldman, the assailant went back to Brown's body and stepped on her back, which caused her bruise. There was a footprint leading to the side of the house. The forensics team determined that the assailant walked, not ran, from the scene. OJ was scheduled to be at a golf tournament in Chicago and had a red-eye flight at 11:45 p.m. His limo driver, Alan Park, was supposed to pick up OJ and drove around the estate. He testified that he didn't see OJ's Bronco parked outside. The driver tried to buzz the estate at 10:40 p.m., but got no response. Park testified he saw a shadowy figure on the side of the house where a bloody glove was later found. At 10:50 p.m., Cato Kalin heard a loud thump, and minutes later, OJ answered the door, claiming he had overslept. Park testified that OJ complained that it was hot even though it wasn't hot that night. Although OJ was running late, he did not miss his flight. A broken glass and bedsheets with blood on them were recovered from Simpson's hotel room at the O'Hare Plaza Hotel. Peter Phillips, the former manager of the hotel, recalled Simpson asking for a Band-Aid for his finger at the front desk. The police tried to contact OJ to inform him about Nicole's death. They buzzed the intercom at OJ's estate for over 30 minutes but received no response. Detective Van Natter then instructed other officer Mark Furman to scale the wall and unlock the gate to allow the other 3 detectives in. The detectives would argue they entered without a search warrant because of exigent circumstances. They stated specifically out of fear that someone else might be injured. The police contacted Simpson at his home on Monday, June 13th. Detective Lang noticed that Simpson had a cut on his finger on his left hand that was consistent with where the killer was bleeding from, and asked Simpson how he got it. At first, he claimed he cut his finger accidentally while in Chicago after learning of Nicole's death. Lang then informed Simpson that blood was found inside his Bronco, at which point Simpson admitted that he did cut his finger the same day as the murders, but did not remember how. He voluntarily gave some of his own blood for comparison with evidence collected at the crime scene. OJ hired Robert Shapiro on June 14th and started assembling his Dream Team, which was the nickname given to his defense team. He was said to be in a fragile state of mind and stayed at lawyer Robert Kardashian's house. The LAPD notified Shapiro at 8:30 a.m. on Friday that Simpson would have to surrender that day. At 9:30 a.m., Shapiro went to Kardashian's home to tell Simpson that he would have to surrender by 11 a.m. The police then agreed to have OJ surrender at 12 p.m. and thought this would not be an issue because OJ was a celebrity and they didn't believe a celebrity would flee. The press and police waited for OJ, but he did not show up for his perp walk at 12 p.m. At 1:50 p.m., OJ Simpson was declared a fugitive.
At 5 p.m., Robert Kardashian read to the press OJ's public letter. He had also written one for each of his kids. This letter was addressed to his friends, and in it, OJ proclaimed his innocence. This letter was assumed to be a suicide note because it included phrases like, quote, "I can't go on." He also apologized to the Goldman family and to his then-girlfriend. OJ's lawyer, Robert Shapiro, appealed to OJ to surrender. At 5:51 p.m., OJ called 911, and this call was traced to the Santa Ana freeway. News helicopters filmed a white Bronco, believed to be owned by Crowley, racing down the same freeway. At 6:45 p.m., Officer Ruth Dixon caught up to the Bronco and noticed that Crowley was driving. When asked why he wasn't stopping, Crowley said that OJ was in the back and had a gun to his own head. She backed off but followed the Bronco at 35 miles per hour, or 56 kilometers per hour, with about 20 other officers joining in on the chase. Zoe Turr was the first reporter to start broadcasting the Bronco chase. Eventually, 9 other news helicopters joined in on the coverage, but the chase was so long that they had to stop and refuel. Television stations interrupted coverage of the 1994 NBA Finals to broadcast the incident. The pursuit was watched live by an estimated 95 million people. During the chase, OJ was talked to through the radio by his former USC football coach, and Crowley believes this stopped OJ from harming himself. Thousands of spectators and onlookers packed overpasses along the route of the chase, waiting for the white Bronco. In a festival-like atmosphere, many had signs urging Simpson to flee. Spectators shouted, quote, "Go, OJ, go," which was the famous slogan from Simpson's Hertz commercials. On June 20th, OJ Simpson was arraigned and pleaded not guilty and was held without bail. A grand jury was called but then dismissed on June 23rd because they didn't think the grand jury could be impartial. On July 22nd, Simpson entered his plea as, quote, absolutely 100% not guilty, end quote. He requested a speedy trial, and both the defense and prosecution worked for several months to get ready. OJ assembled the dream team that was led by Johnny Cochran. The others' attorneys include his initial lawyer, Robert Shapiro, Robert Kardashian, Sarah Kaplan, Alan Dershowitz, Carl Douglas, and Lee Bailey. The two lead prosecutors were Deputy District Attorneys Marsha Clark and Christopher Darden. Clark was selected as the lead prosecutor. They were assisted by DNA expert ADAs Harmon and Clark. The trial started on January 24, 1995, 7 months after the murder. Judge Lance Ito presided over the case. The district attorney, Gil Garcetti, wanted the trial to be moved to Santa Monica, but the Los Angeles Superior Court decided it would take place in downtown LA. This led to some speculation that the trial may have had a different outcome if the jurors were from the more educated Santa Monica. Judge Ito started interviewing 304 prospective jurors. They had to fill out a 75-page questionnaire. On November 3rd, 12 jurors were selected along with 12 alternates. When the trial concluded, only 4 of the original jurors remained. The jury was sequestered for the duration of the trial, which lasted approximately 285 days.
The prosecution presented a case that focused on OJ being a serial abuser who killed Nicole when she refused to get back with him. They alleged that Ron Goldman was killed when he entered the yard. Clark said the dance recital caused OJ to be upset with Nicole over a short black dress that she had worn, and that he had broken up with his then-girlfriend in order to reconcile with Nicole. They played Nicole's 911 call that led to OJ's arrest for domestic violence. The prosecution planned to present 62 separate incidents of domestic violence to the jury. However, Marsha Clark made the decision to drop the domestic violence portion and focus solely on the DNA evidence. She thought the DNA evidence was strong enough on its own. The media speculated it was because dismissed juror Jeanette Harris alleged that the jury was divided among race. Harris was dismissed because she didn't disclose she was a victim of domestic violence herself. She then went on to say that the domestic violence case that the prosecution was presenting was, quote, a whole lot of nothing, end quote. This led to speculation that the jury would not be sympathetic to Nicole's experience of domestic violence. Christopher later confirmed this to be the case. The prosecution decided to pivot toward focusing on the DNA evidence. They had several pieces of DNA and other physical evidence that linked OJ to the crime scene. Some of the most convincing evidence was OJ's DNA next to the bloody footprints near the victims, OJ's DNA in a trail of blood drops leading away from the victims towards the back gate. Ron and Nicole's DNA profile was found outside of the door and inside of OJ's Bronco. Simpson, Goldman, and Brown's DNA was found on a bloody glove outside of OJ's house. OJ and Nicole's DNA was found on a pair of socks in Simpson's bedroom. Fibers from the glove found in Simpson's house matched the fibers from the glove found at the crime scene, which proved that they were a pair. Hair consistent with Goldman was found on Brown, which supported the theory that Brown was killed first and then Goldman. The glove found at OJ's house had hair and clothing fibers that were consistent with Ron and Nicole. The Dream Team presented a case focused around reasonable doubt. They stated that the aforementioned DNA evidence was compromised by the mishandling of criminalists Dennis Fung and Andrea Mazzola. They said that the DNA evidence was contaminated and that the only reason why OJ's DNA was present was because it was planted by the police. They also alleged police fraud. The defense also presented information that the murders happened at 11 p.m. that night. On July 14, 1995, Dr. Robert Huizenga testified that OJ could not commit the murder because he was physically incapable due to football injuries and chronic arthritis. The prosecution challenged this assertion by presenting evidence that he made a workout video. Dr. Huizenga then admitted that OJ could commit the murder because he was in, quote, the throes of an adrenaline rush, end quote. One of the main aspects of the defense was that the police conspired against OJ. They argued that all of the police's evidence was planted with the express goal of making OJ look as guilty as possible. The defense argued the motive was racism. Furman is on tape repeatedly using the N-word with a hard R over 41 times. These tapes were the cornerstone of the defense's argument that Furman was a racist and that he lacked credibility. This set the prosecution case back, so they decided to call Furman back, but that did not help because he invoked his Fifth Amendment protections against self-incrimination twice. In order to save their case, Darden decided to have OJ try on the glove. Marcia Clark was surprised because they had agreed that they wouldn't do that because the glove could have shrunk due to being frozen and unfrozen several times. The glove also had multiple DNA profiles on it. Simpson struggled to put the glove on, and the prosecution claimed it was due to OJ's use of arthritis medication. In 2012, Darden accused Cochran of tampering with the glove, but Dershowitz argued that this was not possible since the defense only has controlled access to evidence.
Cochran had many notable lines in his closing arguments, including describing Van Nader and Furman as the deception twins. He told the jury to remember that Van Nader was the man who carried the blood and Furman was the man who found the glove. In response to the botching of OJ trying on the glove, Cochran famously stated, quote, "If the glove don't fit, then you must acquit." When it was time to read the verdict, everyone was on high alert. Then President Bill Clinton was briefed on the situation, and all LA police officers were placed on 12-hour shifts. The jury only reviewed the testimony from OJ's limo driver, Alan Park. At 10:07 a.m. on Tuesday, October 3rd, 1995, Orenthal James Simpson was acquitted on both counts of murder. The jury had decided their verdict the day before at 3 p.m., but Judge Ito delayed the verdict. After the verdict was read, juror Lionel Cryer gave Simpson the Black Power salute. Approximately 100 million people worldwide watched or listened to the verdict. The reactions to the verdict were split among racial lines. Blacks tended to believe OJ was innocent, and whites tended to believe that OJ was guilty. More recent surveys have shown a change, with 83% of white Americans still believing that OJ is guilty and 57% of blacks agreeing. No matter how anyone feels, double jeopardy is in play, which means OJ can never be tried again for the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. Despite the acquittal, the Los Angeles Police Department has no plans to reopen this case. In January 1997, the families of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown brought a wrongful death lawsuit against OJ in civil court. Due to double jeopardy, this was the only other way to hold OJ accountable for Ron and Nicole's death. OJ's criminal defense bill was estimated to be between $3 and $6 million, and he could not afford the same level of defense during the civil trial. After deliberating for 5 days, a civil jury found Simpson responsible for the death of Nicole and Ron. The burden of proof is much lower in civil court, which we will discuss a little bit more later. The families were awarded $33.5 million in compensatory and punitive damages. OJ has made no effort to pay on this judgment. In November 2006, Reagan Books published what they described as a hypothetical confession. The book, If I Did It, was ghostwritten by Pablo and coincided with the Fox special involving Simpson. The Goldman family was awarded rights to the books and published it under the name If I Did It, Confessions of a Killer, with the cover minimizing the word if. In 2007, Simpson was charged with breaking into a Las Vegas hotel room and taking sports memorabilia that he claimed had been stolen from him. On October 3, 2008, he was found guilty and sentenced to 33 years in prison. On July 31, 2013, the Nevada Parole Board granted Simpson parole on some convictions, but his imprisonment continued based on the weapons and assault convictions. He was released from prison on parole on October 1, 2017. He currently lives in Las Vegas, where he lives off of his Screen Actors Guild and NFL pension. This money is not required to go to any of his court settlements.
Dell and I are united in believing that OJ committed this crime. There is an overwhelming amount of evidence that shows he abused Nicole and that this murder was a crime of jealousy and rage. While we are convinced, not everyone is, and some still maintain that they think OJ is innocent. There are several conspiracies connected to this case. Please note we are not endorsing any of these conspiracies. We're just stating what's kind of out there in the public's mindset. The first conspiracy theory that we're going to dive into is that O.J. Simpson's son, Jason, was the one who actually committed the murders. The theory comes from private detective William Dear. Dear wrote the book, O.J. is Innocent and I Can Prove It. Dear collected this circumstantial evidence against Jason by digging through his trash and an abandoned storage locker. He claims that Jason Simpson battled with intermittent rage disorder and assaulted his girlfriend 2 months prior to the murders. Jason does have an alibi, but Dear claims that that was falsified. Another theory is that O.J. has CTE and he unknowingly committed the murder. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy is a brain injury that is commonly found in NFL players and other professional sports players. O.J. played in the NFL for 10 years and played collegiate football prior to that. The doctor who discovered CTE believes O.J. likely has it as well. This theory cannot be proven while O.J. is alive, however, because there is no test for CTE that can be done while someone is alive. The brain has to be looked at once someone is deceased. And the next theory is a little strange. It says that O.J. hired serial killer Glenn Rogers to commit the murders. Rogers' brother also claims in his book that his brother admitted to killing Nicole and Ron. It's a really wild theory. I actually had not even heard of it until we were doing research on the case. Those conspiracies tried to pin the murder on someone else, but this one took a different approach. There's a theory out there that Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson were in a romantic relationship. O.J., despite dating other women, believed that he and Nicole were going to get back together. Nicole allegedly moving on with Ron angered O.J., and that's why he stabbed Nicole 12 times and stabbed Ron 25 times.
Diana Spencer was born on July 1st, 1961, near Sandringham, England. She became Lady Diana Spencer after her father inherited the title of Earl Spencer in 1975. She married the heir to the British throne, Prince Charles, on July 29, 1981. Together they had 2 sons, Prince William and Prince Harry, and they officially divorced in 1996. Princess Diana was loved worldwide because of her global humanitarian work and many other reasons. She was rumored to be dating Egyptian billionaire Dodi Fayed shortly after her divorce from Charles. Diana and Dodi arrived in Paris on August 30th, 1997, following a French Riviera vacation. As soon as they arrived via private plane, paparazzi were following them. Diana at the time was one of the most photographed women in the world, and the year before she had won a restraining order against a paparazzo who had crashed into her car in order to get a photo. Diana and Dodi arrived at the Ritz Hotel, which Dodi's father owned, in the late afternoon. She went to the salon for a hair appointment, and he went to a nearby jeweler, as it was believed he was planning to propose to Diana during this trip. The couple then rested in the hotel's imperial suite before going to Fayed's apartment around 7 p.m. to get dressed for dinner. Paparazzi followed, and Dodi got into a shoving match with the pushy photographers. At the apartment, Diana checked in with her children, who were in Scotland with Prince Charles and the Queen. The couple first attempted to go to Chez Benoit for dinner, but were overrun by photographers. They then returned to the Ritz and ordered food in the restaurant's dining room before eventually returning to their suite for privacy. They needed to get back to Dodi's apartment, so he devised a plan. The couple's driver and bodyguards would make a big show out front, appearing to get their caravan of Mercedes sedans ready to leave. Meanwhile, the princess and Fayed would slip out the back door in a borrowed car driven by hotel security officer Henry Paul. However, photographers were tipped off about the escape, quickly catching up on their motorcycles. Driving a Mercedes, Paul took bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones, Diana, and Dodi on a high-speed trip through the boulevards and narrow streets of central Paris. Paul darted in and out of traffic at an estimated 70 miles per hour, eventually crashing into a pillar in the middle of the highway inside the Pont de l'Alma tunnel near the Eiffel Tower and River Seine. Dodi and Paul died instantly, while Rees-Jones was seriously injured but survived. He was the only one in the vehicle wearing a seatbelt. Early reports said Diana was suffering from a concussion, broken arm, and cut thigh. However, the princess had also suffered massive chest injuries and a severed pulmonary vein. Diana was taken to the La Petite Salpêtrière hospital, where she underwent 2 hours of emergency surgery before being declared dead as a result from her injuries and internal bleeding in the early morning hours of August 31st, 1997. She was just 36 years old.
The world was shocked by Diana's tragic and sudden death. They were also shocked and disturbed by the lack of response from Queen Elizabeth II and the fact that flags were not lowered at Buckingham Palace. Queen Elizabeth II finally made a televised address from Buckingham Palace on September 5th, where she said, quote, "No one who knew Diana will ever forget her. Millions of others who never met her but felt they knew her will remember her. I, for one, believe there are lessons to be drawn from her life and from the extraordinary and moving reaction to her death. I share in your determination to cherish her memory." End quote. Diana's funeral was held on September 6, 1997. A funeral procession commenced from Kensington Palace, her coffin resting on a gun carriage drawn by 6 black horses. Thousands of mourners packed the streets to watch, with 15-year-old Prince William and 12-year-old Prince Harry joining the final stretch of the 4-mile procession for their mother. An estimated 2.5 billion people tuned in on television to watch the ceremony at Westminster Abbey, which featured a powerful eulogy from Diana's brother, Earl Charles Spencer, and a performance from her friend Elton John. Diana's body was laid to rest at a gravesite on a small island at her family's estate off Thorpe. It was initially believed that paparazzi were at fault for Diana, Dodi, and Paul's death. An investigation into their deaths and an official report was released in 1999 that stated that Henry Paul was drunk behind the wheel and that his condition may have been worsened by prescription antidepressant he was taking at the time. Claims and counterclaims from more than 250 witnesses poured in after the 1999 report. In April 2008, an inquest jury at the Royal Courts of Justice in London returned verdicts of unlawful killing for both the princess and Dodi, the equivalent of manslaughter in a criminal court. They said that the paparazzi who pursued the princess's car and its driver, Mr. Paul, were both to blame for the tragic accident because of their quote-unquote gross negligence. The jury also concluded that the couple may have lived if they had worn seatbelts. Several members of the paparazzi were questioned immediately after the accident, but they were released. The British Metropolitan Police conducted Operation Paget, which looked into 175 theories and found that each was without any basis and proved once again that Princess Diana's death was an accident. Despite these reports and investigations, many believe that her death was no accident and that she was in fact murdered. And this brings us to the numerous theories surrounding Diana's death. The first theory, and perhaps the most popular, is that the accident was actually an assassination arranged by the royal family. People claim that Prince Charles couldn't remarry if Diana was alive. The Royal Succession Act cuts against this theory because Charles could remarry legally, just not within the Anglican Church. For this part of the theory to be true, they would have had to kill Camilla's ex-husband as well as Diana. Charles and Camilla were married in a civil ceremony with the Queen's blessing due to the likelihood of children being low. Also, Princess Anne remarried while her ex-husband was still alive. Something to note is that there is also no children as a result of this second marriage. Dodi's father, Muhammad al-Fayed, believes this theory and says that Diana was pregnant at the time of her death and that the royal family did not want Prince William and Prince Harry to have a Muslim half-sibling or family and covered up her pregnancy and prevented Diana from marrying Dodi with the car accident. Fayed said that the royal family, quote, could not accept that an Egyptian Muslim could eventually be the stepfather of the future King of England, end quote. Fayed even publicly said that Diana phoned him on the night she died to tell him about the alleged pregnancy. Discussion of a potential pregnancy came up before Diana died in the crash, with some newspapers speculating that she might be pregnant. That speculation was bolstered by mysterious comments Diana made about a quote, big surprise. Despite Fayeed's claims, post-mortem examinations didn't find any evidence that Diana was pregnant. Friends also said that she did not express feelings that she could be pregnant, and they claimed she was using contraception. Diana had allegedly told close friends and her butler that she felt the royal family was watching her. A letter from Diana to her former butler, Paul Burrell, implied that Diana suspected her husband was planning to kill her with a quote accident in my car, end quote, with quote unquote brake failure and quote unquote serious head injury so that he could marry someone else. She allegedly wrote the letter 10 months before she died in the Paris car crash. Her note also included, quote, I am sitting here at my desk today in October, longing for someone to hug me and encourage me to keep strong and hold my head high. This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous, end quote. When Diana wrote the letter, she had experienced problems with her car, had voiced fears about them, and her bodyguard had died in an accident that she believed had been a conspiracy. Diana's former bodyguard, Barry Manicky, was possibly murdered in an orchestrated motorbike accident after they allegedly became too close and possibly had an affair. People claim Burrell forged the letter himself, and Burrell has said that the media took too much stock in the note. Another reason why Diana could have been killed by the royal family was her political activism, including her call to end the usage of landmines. This placed Diana on a world stage and added a political aspect to Diana, which the royal family avoids. The next theory is that the British government arranged to have Diana killed. In another letter, Diana allegedly claimed that if she died, MI5, which is the British Security Service, or MI6, which is the British Foreign Intelligence Service, would be responsible for her death. Many think that the British government killed Princess Diana because they viewed her as a threat to the royal family and therefore the stability of the state. It's also believed that she was going to leak embarrassing information about Prince Charles. Records show that MI6 agents were operating in Paris at the time of the car crash. Some suspect that the entrance to the slip road most drivers would have taken from the Ritz Hotel to Dodi's apartment was blocked by MI6, forcing Henry Paul to head into a tunnel instead. When the car entered the tunnel, a bright light supposedly flashed, blinding the driver so that he would swerve and crash, and another vehicle fled the scene. Richard Tomlinson, a former MI6 agent, claimed that he had seen a similar flashing strobe light in his training, used to disorient drivers as a method of vehicular assassination. However, later investigations found that Diana's car would have been driving too fast to go down the first slip road regardless, so it's unlikely that the driver suddenly had to choose another path. The rest of the eyewitness accounts didn't conclude which other vehicles were at the scene. Some people claimed that they saw one motorcycle while others saw six. Some people saw a black car race away, but others remembered a white one. Despite there being 10 to 14 CCTV cameras in and around the tunnel at the time of the accident, none of them were working. Muhammad Al-Fayed also claimed that Diana's bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, knew the crash was premeditated and did nothing to stop it. He supposedly even agreed to cover up details after the fact because the Secret Service threatened to kill him if he revealed their plot. Rees-Jones did receive some threatening calls and letters after the tragedy, but he reported them to the police and didn't seem concerned about them. He still stands by his account in his book, The Bodyguard's Story.
Another one of the more popular theories is that Henry Paul was purposefully involved in the crash. Henry Paul was the head of security at the Ritz Hotel in Paris and the driver of the Mercedes Princess Diana was in. He had worked for the Al-Fayeds for a decade, but theorists believe that he was in the pay of at least one other organization, the security services in either France or the UK or both. Former MI6 officer Richard Tomlinson spread a rumor that he'd seen intelligence files for an assassination of a foreign politician in Paris that had, quote, an eerie similarity, end quote, to Diana's deadly crash, leading to rumors that the driver, Henry Paul, was in on the scheme and was feeding information to MI6. But Tomlinson also happened to have been let go from MI6 for leaking secrets and was famous for trying to ruin the organization's reputation. He also never used Paul's name in connection to the accident. People who doubt the official course of events say that its central claim about Mr. Paul being drunk at the time of the crash was not only false, but a lie spread in the media to cover up the killing, and that was done in part by swapping his body with another person so that the toxicological results would appear correct. There are a number of reasons why people believe this, one being that Mr. Paul did not seem to behave like he was drunk earlier on in the night. Theorists claim the samples used in forensic tests actually belonged to a suicide victim and were used to frame Paul. But toxicologists tested 4 different samples and all suggested that Paul's blood alcohol levels were 3 times the legal limit in France, and there was nothing to suggest that the samples didn't come from Paul's body. Though there were mistakes made with the tests, and repeated checks of those have certified that Mr. Paul had been indeed drinking. And just something to note, blood alcohol levels in the body increase after death no matter how much someone has drank. Some sources have also suggested that they might have had a French source inside the hotel. Another related theory and source of suspicion is the white Fiat Uno. So another suspect of the crash was the driver of the white Fiat Uno that reportedly followed Diana into the tunnel, leaving forensic evidence on the Mercedes that suggested the cars made quote-unquote glancing contact, per the Operation Paget report. Theorists believe the Fiat purposefully hit the Mercedes and sent it into the pillar. Theorists attempted to link the Fiat to James Anderson and thus link the well-known French paparazzo to the crash scene, claiming he was also an MI6 informant. Operation Paget accepted Anderson's statement that he was home with his wife during the crash. But many people are still suspicious of this because Anderson was found dead in his car in the French countryside in 2000. Police ruled it a suicide, but Fayed and other doubters claim he was killed for the part they believe he played in the alleged assassination of Diana and Dodi. Anderson's body was found in a car that was on fire, and I believe there was a wound on his face, and that it was either a gunshot wound or a wound from the fire. And finally, we have to talk about how Princess Diana was treated on the way to the hospital and after she had died. It's believed that doctors allowed Diana to die by not treating her in a proper manner and thus stopping her from properly recovering. Most of this theory revolves around her treatment at the crash scene. If she had instead been taken to the nearest hospital and treated there, many people believe that she may have survived. So to give everyone an idea of the timeline, emergency services were called at 12:26 a.m. Police arrived at 12:30, an ambulance came at 12:40, and Diana was placed in the ambulance at 1:18. The ambulance left the scene at 1:41 and arrived at the hospital at 2:06 a.m. A doctor on board the ambulance asked for the vehicle to drive slowly out of concern for Diana's blood pressure. And Operation Paget states, quote, "The instruction to drive steadily and at low speed is fully justified when patients are in an unstable hemodynamic state, as the phenomenon of acceleration and deceleration, as with moving, can cause variations in volemia and therefore lead to cardiac arrest," end quote. And this time frame that I just gave does include the time it took to remove Diana from the car and the time to get her heart beating again after she went into cardiac arrest. And that is why the doctor asked the ambulance to go so slow, because like we said, the speed could have caused her to go into cardiac arrest again because her blood pressure was kind of all over the place at the time. The ambulance carrying Princess Diana, who was still alive at this time, passed one hospital on its way to another further away from the crash site. The closer hospital was allegedly not equipped to deal with Diana's injuries, and the hospital that she did end up at is known for treating patients with multiple traumas and as well as foreign dignitaries. Another part of this theory comes from the fact that Diana was kept at the scene longer than expected. And this is likely due to a cultural difference, essentially. The French approach to emergency care differs from the UK and the US. In France, emergency crews focus on giving treatment at the scene before moving a person to a hospital. But in the UK, it's about getting the person to the hospital sooner. Another notable thing theorists like to point out is that doctors had started the embalming process surprisingly quickly, which would have made a urine pregnancy test out of the question or created an excuse to claim it was a false positive. Many people believe that Diana was embalmed within an hour of her death, but according to the Operation Paget reports, it was, I believe, like 12 hours later. Embalming before an autopsy is done is against the law in France, and the coroner in this case said that for an embalming to be lawful under French law, authority was required from a French mayor or from French police, as well as a member of the deceased family. But in Princess Diana's case, no family member appeared to have given consent. Diana's injuries were consistent with the cause of death, so doctors didn't really see a reason to delay the embalming process. And another reason why they sped this up is because Prince Charles and Diana's two sisters were due to come view her body later that afternoon before bringing it back to England, and the French president at the time was also due to pay his respects. So they felt they were faced with little time to prepare her body for the viewing, and hospital staff decided to go ahead with the embalming with only verbal authority from the local superintendent of the police. Something else worth noting is that on the day of Diana's death, the weather was very hot in Paris, and Diana's body had been stored in an empty room adjacent to the emergency room where she had been treated, as the mortuary was on the other side of the hospital grounds and a fair distance away. And in the room were dry ice and air conditioning units to keep her body cool, but that didn't do too much, which I think is another reason why the embalming took place. The surgeon who worked on Diana said that the Princess of Wales was not taken to the hospital mortuary as it was felt inappropriate to transport her body across the hospital grounds at the time because of the media interest. As the writers of the Operation Paget report note, such a conspiracy would require a substantial number of expert doctors and other caregivers to both break their ethics and then lie about doing so, and they concluded that that did not happen. It's impossible to say whether or not there would have been more success if Diana was taken to the hospital, but either way, doctors have said that it was an almost impossible case for her to ever survive her injuries. And again, her injuries probably wouldn't have been as bad if she was wearing a seatbelt.
This week's episode, we're going to look at the QAnon conspiracy that has taken over right wing politics. The idea behind this is that a group of Satan worshipping pedophiles, mainly consisting of what they see as elitist Democrats, politicians, journalists, entertainment moguls, and other institutional figures, control much of what they term the deep state government. The deep state is focused on undermining former President Trump with the aid of the media and entertainment outlets. In order to comprehensively discuss this topic, we are going to be talking about very sensitive topics, including child abuse and suicide. Although the Q in QAnon is still a mystery, Q has been described as a high ranking military officer, a group of people, or even Donald Trump himself. The idea can be traced back to Tracy Diaz and two 4chan moderators with the screen names of Pamphlet Anon and Baruch the Scribe. Diaz is a YouTube creator who releases videos related to right wing politics, including Pizzagate and the WikiLeaks release. They stated their goal was to build a large following for QAnon to expose the satanic and pedophilic activities of left wingers and their policies. On November 3rd, 2017, just 6 days after the first 4chan post from Q, Diaz posted a video entitled Q Clearance Anon. Is this hashtag happening? In which she introduced the conspiracy to her audience. In order to reach a more mainstream audience, QAnon moved to Reddit. There, they were able to amass a large following, which moved with them to Facebook and eventually 8chan. 8chan is an offshoot of 4chan, and it is said to be darker and with less rules than its parent forum. Pamphlet Anon, whose real name is Coleman Rogers, had developed larger plans. Within a month, Rogers, 31, and his wife, Christina Urso, 29, had launched the Patriot Soapbox, a round the clock live streamed YouTube channel for QAnon study and discussion. Rogers and Urso used their channel to call for donations that are accepted through PayPal, cryptocurrencies, or mail. Rogers' Facebook page shows that he has been active in internet politics and a staunch supporter of Donald Trump during the 2016 campaign, self identifying as part of the meme war, which is the creation and dissemination of images and internet style commentary that internet agitators on the chans and Reddit credit with Trump's win. Rogers often posted memes about liberal tears, as well as the ludicrous claims that Democrats murdered children and worship Satan, details similar to those that would eventually form the QAnon theory.
So then the question becomes, where does Donald Trump fit into the QAnon conspiracy? QAnon supporters believe that Donald Trump is waging war on the deep state through the exposing of the media, Democrats, and other people they consider the elites. The term deep state is a way to describe a shadow or parallel system of government in which unofficial or publicly unacknowledged individuals play important roles in defining and implementing a country's policies. As early as March 2017, then White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer acknowledged that the administration did indeed believe in the existence of a deep state. Social media and opinion polls indicate there are at least hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people who believe in at least some of the bizarre theories offered up by QAnon. So let's dive into the specific claims that QAnon makes. The main theories that QAnon centers itself around is that the Democrats are elites and evil, Jewish people run the world through controlling banks and the media, and that Donald Trump is the savior of the United States. One of the most ludicrous beliefs they hold is the Pizzagate conspiracy. In March 2016, the personal email account of John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, was hacked in a phishing attack. WikiLeaks published his emails in November 2016. Proponents of the Pizzagate conspiracy falsely claimed the emails contained coded messages that connected several high-ranking Democratic Party officials and U.S. restaurants with an alleged human trafficking and child sex ring. One of the establishments allegedly involved was the Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria in Washington, D.C. As Pizzagate spread, Comet Ping Pong received hundreds of threats from the theory's believers. The restaurant's owners and staff were harassed and threatened on social media websites, and the owner received death threats. In an interview with NPR on November 27, 2016, Comet Ping Pong owner James Alefantis referred to the conspiracy theory as, quote, an insanely complicated, made-up, fictional, lie-based story, end quote, and a coordinated political attack. On December 10, 2016, the New York Times published an article that analyzed the theory's claims. Pizzagate theorists claimed an underground network beneath Comet Ping Pong. The restaurant has no basement, however, and the picture used to support this claim was taken in another facility. They also claimed to have a picture of restaurant owner Alefantis wearing a t-shirt endorsing pedophilia. However, the image was of another person, and the shirt, which read J'adore l'enfant, was actually a reference to the L'Enfant Cafe bar in DC, whose owner was pictured in the image, and which itself is named after Pierre Charles L'Enfant, the designer of much of the layout of Washington, D.C.
There have been several attacks on the business involved in this conspiracy. On December 4, 2016, Edgar Madison Welsh, a 28-year-old man from Salisbury, North Carolina, arrived at Comet Ping Pong and fired 3 shots from an AR-15 style rifle that struck the restaurant's walls, a desk, and a door. Welsh later told police that he had planned to, quote, self-investigate, end quote, The conspiracy theory. Welsh told police that he had read online that the Comet restaurant was harboring child sex slaves and that he wanted to see for himself if they were there. On January 25, 2019, Comet Ping Pong suffered an arson attack when a fire was started in one of its back rooms. Employees quickly extinguished the blaze and no one was injured. In November 2016, Michael Flynn, then on President elect Donald Trump's transition team and Trump's designated national security advisor, posted multiple tweets on Twitter containing conspiratorial material related to Hillary Clinton. They allege that Clinton's campaign manager, John Podesta, drank the blood and bodily fluids of other humans in satanic rituals, which Political says, quote, soon morphed into the hashtag Pizzagate conspiracy theory involving Comic Ping Pong. After the shooting incident at Comic Ping Pong, Michael Flynn Jr., Michael T. Flynn's son, and also a member of Trump's transition team, tweeted, quote, until hashtag Pizzagate is proven to be false, it'll remain a story. The left seems to forget hashtag Podesta emails and the many coincidences tied to it, end quote. In 2020, Pizzagate merged into QAnon and broadened its scope to include prominent celebrities that support the Democrat Party. This included people such as Bill Gates, Ellen DeGeneres, Oprah Winfrey, and Chrissy Teigen. Justin Bieber's 2020 song Yummy was alleged to be about the conspiracy theory. A related conspiracy theory, known as, quote, Frazzle Rip, emerged in 2018, falsely claiming that an extreme snuff film recovered from Anthony Weiner's stolen laptop and circulated on the dark web showed Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin raping and murdering a young girl, drinking her adrenochrome-rich blood in a satanic ritual, and taking turns wearing the girl's face like a mask.
The belief that the Clintons are evil and satanic is prevalent in other beliefs that QAnon holds. This includes the belief that the Clintons are directly responsible for more than 50 deaths. Such accusations have been around at least since the 90s, when a film called The Clinton Chronicles, produced by Larry Nichols and promoted by Reverend Jerry Falwell, accused Bill Clinton of multiple crimes, including murder. The following are some examples and the facts behind them. C. Victor Razor II was National Finance Co-Chairman for Bill Clinton. He died in a plane crash along with his son and 3 others on July 30th, 1992, during a fishing trip. Conspiracy theorists believe the crash to have been deliberately caused, yet the National Transportation Safety Board stated factors related to the accident were mountainous terrain and a low ceiling. Mary Mahone was a White House intern who, in the early summer of 1997, was gunned down outside a Starbucks in the Georgetown suburb of Washington, D.C. The robber entered the store and shot Mahone after she attempted to take his gun. He then shot the other 2 Starbucks employees and fled, afraid the cops would show up. Deputy White House counsel Vincent W. Foster was found dead in Fort Marcy Park in Virginia outside Washington, D.C., on July 20th, 1993. An autopsy determined that he was shot in the mouth and no other wounds were found on his body. His death was ruled a suicide by 5 official investigations. The unsolved 2016 murder of Democratic National Committee staff member Seth Rich prompted conspiracy theorists to speculate that Hillary Clinton arranged his death. The theory was based on a Fox News report, later retracted, that Rich had been responsible for WikiLeaks' release of DNC emails during the 2016 United States presidential campaign. Various elements of this theory have been promoted by prominent right-wing figures, including Alex Jones, Newt Gingrich, and Sean Hannity. Convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, being held on federal charges of child sex trafficking, was found dead in his cell at the high-security Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan on August 10, 2019. An official autopsy later declared it suicide by hanging. Hours after Epstein's death, Trump retweeted claims that Epstein's death was related to Clinton, including the hashtag Clinton body count. Lynn Patton, a Trump appointee at HUD, said, quote, Hillaried, end quote, and used the hashtag Vince Foster Part 2 in an Instagram post about Epstein's death. QAnon also believes that the Mueller investigation is actually a counter coup led by Trump, who pretended to conspire with Russia in order to hire Mueller to secretly investigate the Democrats. They think the CIA installed North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as a puppet ruler. The Rothschild family leads a satanic cult, and typically the allegations revolve around investigators using existing satanic cults to lure and blackmail left-wing activists.
The last false belief of QAnon that we are going to discuss is their belief that Donald Trump did not lose the 2020 United States presidential election to then Vice President Joe Biden. To fully examine this claim, we need to give some background. In March of 2020, the country started shutting down non essential businesses and services due to COVID. They also recommended limiting crowd sizes and wearing masks to slow the spread. This caused people to start thinking about how to safely carry out elections, specifically the general election that was scheduled for November 3rd. The safest option was to allow people to vote by mail. 5 states, Colorado, Hawaii, Oregon, Utah, and Washington, were already carrying out all mail ballot elections. This was extended to other states, including California, New Jersey, Nevada, and Vermont. The rest of the states had some degree of absentee voting allowed, including ones that required a valid reason. Since the pandemic and adherence to CDC guidelines had become a very partisan issue, many political analysts predicted that the Democrats would primarily be voting by mail and Republicans would be voting in person in the states that they could. They added that this means on election night, it could appear that Trump was winning, while states that were still counting mail in ballots. And they also theorized that the results would not be available that night. The analysts were right about both of these things, as Trump was leading at the end of election night, and Biden wasn't projected as the winner of the 2020 election until November 7th. This followed the past tradition of media outlets calling elections and projecting a winner. In past elections, the loser would then call the winner to congratulate them and then publicly concede and call for unity. This is not what happened in 2020, with Trump claiming that there was voter fraud and that mail in voting was unconstitutional. He had started saying this before the election, stating that if he lost, it was because of fraud. He was aided in this by former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, Senators Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, and a host of representatives and media personalities, specifically from OANN and Newsmax. Trump and his allies specifically focused on Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Their claims followed the same pattern that in each of these states there was fraud. They will often say that dead people voted multiple times, ballot for Trump was thrown out, and that laws that allowed mail in ballots did not go through the proper channels like going through the state's Congress. They accused governors, both Democratic and Republican, of working against Trump voters and suppressing their vote. There was no basis for these claims, and no evidence was presented proving it. This did not matter to QAnon. Many mainstream Republicans, such as then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham, continued to support these claims. This was until the Electoral College certified the election results, with Biden winning 306 votes and Trump winning 232 votes. Many viewed this as the final hurdle to cross, especially since Trump's team had lost over 60 court cases, including one that was petitioned by the state of Texas to the Supreme Court.
The final process for the presidential election in the United States is for Congress to certify the vote. This was scheduled for January 6, 2021. It includes the vice president reading the votes and does allow for the members of Congress to object. Then Vice President Mike Pence indicated he would not object. He noted he did not have the constitutional authority to challenge the Electoral College votes. Senator Josh Hawley stated he would object, and all that was needed was a member of the House of Representatives to object with him. Many representatives came forward to support Hawley. He also gained support in the Senate from Ted Cruz and then Senator Kelly Loeffler. They planned to object to Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Michigan. At the same time of the certification, President Trump and his allies held a rally under the slogan "Stop the Steal" in the Ellipse outside the National Mall. During his speech, Trump stated they would go down to the Capitol. The certification started as normal, with both houses certifying Alabama and Alaska. While the houses were separately considering an objection to accepting Arizona's electoral votes that had been raised by Representative Paul Gosar and endorsed by Senator Ted Cruz, the Trump supporters, including QAnon adherents and Proud Boys, stormed the Capitol building. This ended with 5 people dead, including Ashley Babbitt, who was shot while trying to enter a restricted area. She was a known follower of QAnon and a Trump supporter. Mitch McConnell and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi strongly condemned the attacks and vowed that the certification would not be delayed any longer. Many people, including Loeffler, stated they would no longer support rejecting the electoral votes, so the only other state that was objected to was Pennsylvania. At 3:41 a.m. on January 7th, Congress confirmed the outcome of the Electoral College vote. Biden's 306 votes to Trump's 232, with Pence declaring that Biden and Harris would take office on January 20th.